Good evening, everybody, and welcome to the Finance Subcommittee meeting. Tonight, we're in the George Romm Little Theater here at Brockton High School. Today's date is April 4th, and it is 6:37. I'm going to start with a roll call and establish a quorum. Mrs. Sullivan? Yes. Mr. Homer?
Here.
Mrs. Mendez?
Here.
Mr. Rodriguez?
Here.
Ms. Azak?
Here.
Mr. Sullivan? Here. And I'm here as well as the chair, Kathleen Ehlers, and we'll get right to it. The first and only piece to this agenda is the fiscal year 2024 budget update. And Aldo, take it away.
Sure. Just before I start that, you asked off camera earlier about the bus depot.
So let me just explain to the public. So in our last meeting, which was for safety, transportation, and security, I asked a question for an update about the bus depot, and that is what Mr. Petronio is responding to do at this point.
Yes. The CFO of the city, Troy Clarkson, sent out the proposal, which is it's a friendly taking as opposed to a hostile taking of a property, where the owner has agreed to our appraisal price on it. He sent that out to bond counsel. They reviewed it, wrote up the documents for the taking of the property and the price. That was sent back, and he submitted it this morning, which is the cutoff for next Monday night. So that's gone to City Council. So next Monday will be the first reading of it, and my assumption is they will then forward that to the Finance Committee, which is the following Monday.
Tuesday.
Oh, it's going to be Tuesday, that's right, because it's a holiday Monday. They'll forward that to the council. I assume they'll read it and decide in one night, one way or the other. Either way, they will then send it back to the city council to vote on it the following Monday. If the city council approves it, then it has to get posted, I think for a 10-day period, it has to be posted in the paper. And then after that, they'll schedule a second reading to take a final vote on it. So it'll be about the second week of May, probably, we'll know.
Thank you so much for that update.
Sure.
Now moving on to the fiscal year 2024 budget update.
Yes. So I just handed out to everybody what I call the ESUM, it's the Expense Summary Report. And basically, some of you have seen this before. What I do is I compare period 9, which is March, July is period 1, August is period 2, so period 9 is March. So period 9 of FY23, I compare it to FY22, exactly 1 year ago. And we go through and what myself, Chris, the finance office does, we look at, these are all our different line items within the budget. They're all broken up by what's called an org. But basically, it's a cumulative report of each line item. So we go through them each month and we look at how our spending is going. That's how we kind of track it. On a budget as large as ours, which is over $200 million, you really track it by percentages spent. It's hard to track to the dollar, especially where a week's worth of payroll for us could be as much, well, a bi-weekly, as much as $5-6 million. So to try and monitor it dollar by dollar is difficult. So we monitor it by percentages and see if we're on line, on track. In doing so, looking through some of the line items, we see that we're a little more, we've spent a little more than last year at this time. So in preparing for June 30th, every year we close the budget at some point. This year we probably closed it a month earlier than usual. We closed the budget to stop spending to try and get our budget in line. So we shut down all the spending, the non-discretionary spending. Is anything that's a contract like electricity or gas and oil, those are non-discretionary. All the discretionary spending we basically freeze, and then we, on a one-by-one basis, will determine whether an expense is necessary or not, or to be put off, either not or put off for a later date. So with the budget being as tight as we're seeing it now, we're going through and looking at areas that we can basically garner funds to get us through the rest of the year. In doing so, our budget doesn't just end on June 30th. Our budget does, but our payrolls go all the way to the end of August. So a teacher's paycheck goes September to August. But those July and August payments count back to June 30th. So we have to make sure we keep enough available cash to cover those payments. In doing so, one of the areas we found this year is our special education out-of-district costs. So when we send students to schools that are out of district, those schools tend to be very expensive, And that's, we have evaluation done by a psychologist, psychiatrist, and the special ed team meets. They meet with the parents, decide what's the best placement for the child. So those this year have been going up quite a bit. We've had, ever since the pandemic, it's been going up much more than we budgeted for. So that's part of the problem we have with our budget. Looks like we're running very tight on the money. So last week or so, we sent out the email letting everyone know that their budget was closed. And one by one, we're working with them to control the costs for the rest of the year. Another issue that we've run into with our overall budget is back in September, up until September, through COVID, there was a moratorium on evictions of families. That was lifted in September. And since then, a lot of people are getting evicted. So our homeless number has more than doubled from when we started school. That we in turn have all sorts of additional costs, everything from transportation. Some of these students, when they get evicted, if they end up out of Brockton, we have to go get them, bring them back, require more services as far as keeping them in line and with their grades and whatnot. So we pick up many additional costs with that. That's something that we're hoping, bringing it up to the Department of Ed. I'm hoping that the state will do something, because it's not just Brockton, it's any other urban area has that same situation where those costs are, they're spiraling. The transportation piece alone is probably $1 million this year for that. So again, we watch it, we monitor it, we bring it up. I brought it up with our state delegation. We had a meeting with the mayor and them. We brought that point up. So we're asking them, as they develop the budget, if there's something they can do. Shifting to next year's budget, the state announced months ago that they were allowing a 14% increase to the out-of-district placements, the schools that take care of our students. We spend about $10 million a year on that, so that'd be $1.4 million that we've been looking at. Everyone got together, MASS, Mass Association of School Superintendents in general, school business officers, we've been emailing, sending letters. So the governor last week announced that she's submitting a supplemental budget, and it's supposed to help with those costs. We have the number in the aggregate for the whole state, but I haven't received how it breaks out for Brockton. So I'm hoping that it's targeted exactly right, and we get at least some of the money towards those additional costs. But either way, that's a budget item that I'm working into the budget. I'm planning for the high end of it, hoping I can bring that number back down. Our loss in student enrollment, we lost 356 students. So for next year's budget, we're losing on those 356 students about $7 million. That's a big hit for us, especially since we've settled all of our contracts and whatnot. Our low-income number has still not met the 80% threshold, which would bring us in another $6.4 million. We are less than 1% away from that number. So again, I've asked for some disposition on that. Aside from the regular Chapter 70 budget, the Department of Ed does set aside what they call pothole funds. And each year they'll develop what those potholes are for. So this is an area we're asking that they recognize. They have many different areas they set up, they change every year. So we're hoping something can happen with that. In looking at next year's budget and looking at our spending this year, we are now looking at having to realign our staffing levels with our enrollment. Over the past 3 years, we've lost over 1,000 students. We haven't really lost any staff. So we now need to get that back in line because we can't sustain it long-term. So we'll be looking at attrition, we'll be looking at retirements, and seeing how we can get that balanced out. Our teaching and learning department right now is looking at every school, the amount of enrollment at the school and the subject matters, the types of students that are there, to see how we can tighten up our budget basically and get that back in line. Our McKinney event, though, like I said, our transportation costs have gone up as we've received more SPED students in the district. We have more SPED costs. With the preschool, any child that is special education in the preschool, we now have to also pick up. It's an additional cost we have to work on. So I hopefully in the next week or so we'll have a more detailed budget for next year. I'm trying to add all these costs in. I'm trying to get my figures from the state on what to assume The city just gave me the health insurance factor. Health insurance is a large part of our budget, their budget in general. So factoring those in, I should have a better picture of what we're looking at in about a week or so. And then we'll discuss where to go from there.
So before I open up the floor to questions, one quick question. Out of all of the itemized challenges that we have, what do you think, in your past experience, is realistic, and what do you think is a stretch for us to be able to get in terms of, I know we have the supplemental budget, and I realize this is a leap of, this is asking you to kind of forecast, but what do you think is most likely, and what do you think is going to be an effort in nothing?
Usually, once the governor puts their budget out, usually there's money left for the House and Senate to kind of spread around. I'm hoping for $1 million to $2 million on that. We won't know that until the second or third week of April, usually.
Okay.
I mean, they're running behind themselves because the governor didn't put her budget out in time.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm hoping we get that by the end of April. That'll give us a better indication of where we are, because if you do have to do some reductions in force,
Yeah.
that'll put you in a better position of not having to submit as many slips.
That's kind of what I was getting at, like how quickly are we going to be able to get answers, and what do you think are the most likely positive answers, so that we can realistically look at realigning those staffs based off of the loss of population?
So we're gonna work up a large number now, and then hopefully with whatever additional funds come in, basically you'll plug that number back in and it'll reduce the number down.
Okay.
So we need to be prepared, so we're not doing it at the very last minute. Usually the same day the House comes out with their number, usually the Department of Ed releases our information to us. They release it in the aggregate, and then all of us districts, we're usually on a phone call. They release it at 11 a.m., we're usually on a phone call at 4 o'clock, like a Zoom. In the old days, it was just a phone call, now it's a Zoom. And everyone's getting their information from them, and then they open up their portal so we can actually go in and see what funds we're receiving. So I think that the state has enough money to do something for us. I know that their budget had surplus for last year. I know this year their revenues are ahead of schedule, so I'm hoping they, find it to
Throw some our way?
some our way. I mean, there's a lot of outcry from the secondary level of education, from the colleges looking for money, but I'm hoping for now they send it our way. So.
Excellent. So I'm going to open up the floor to other committee members for questions. Mr. Sullivan?
Yes, Aldo, I was talking about, is this one? Can you hear me?
No.
Hello?
Yep.
Okay. No, I got a new one, just, okay.
Can you give one to him?
This one,
Something?
hello?
Can you take yours?
I'll take this one. Does it work?
Yeah.
Sorry.
Oh my God, who's on first? Mr. Sullivan?
Yes, the 356 students that are missing, do you have any idea what happened to them? Do they go to other schools, or do they move, or?
Both. Both. They've moved. Some have gone more south where rents are cheaper, New Bedford, Fall River, Taunton. Others have moved out of state. I know Marcia and her team at the Parent Information Center has done a good job doing exit interviews with families, and a lot of them have moved out of Brockton because the rents are some of the highest in the state, and which is a good thing for city growth, but for people that are struggling financially, it has forced a lot of them to move to more south, further away from Boston. And that's the most from the feedback she's getting.
I was wondering if they're going to the charter school, or?
Yeah, obviously we've lost, but we're pretty much fit. We've reached our max with the charter. I believe it was last year they added their final grade. for the New Heights charter, so that was pretty much now they're at their cap. So that really didn't cost us many more students for New Heights. But I'm sure, some of those kids ended up going to private schools. We do lose kids from 8th grade to 9th grade going to Xaverians and BC Highs and CM and those kind of places. So that's something else you have to factor in. But a good amount have moved out of the city.
Mike, have you got a plan to try to get those kids back, or is there anything in the works?
Yeah, I mean, we're completing a video, promotional video that will be coming out soon. We'll have the draft of it. Jess and the team, they're finalizing that with our production company. The production company we're using, we're going to try to do some different things with athletics that hopefully keeps students back from leaving and going to other schools to play sports. And also just growing our Chapter 74 programs to make sure that, we're offering more career and tech options for students to stay here. 'Cause I believe we get about 8,000 more student that is...
7,000 or 8,000 more.
It's about 8,000 more for a student that is in a Chapter 74 vocational program, so growing those is also important.
That'll draw
But the
kids.
thing that's really hurting is we sent a lot more kids out of district this year for very severe mental health issues where they cannot be serviced in the district. And those costs could be up to $200,000 to $300,000 a year in tuition to the private schools. For each student. So between that, we also have to transport them there. And these are students that need severe assistance and support that we cannot provide in the district. And because of COVID, and as you see across the country of issues with mental health, that has caused us to send a lot of students out, which really sent our budget up a lot. And also, we're hoping that the state helps us with so every district is dealing with the outside placement, even the smaller districts are actually it doesn't hurt, it hurts them less than us because they don't obviously have as many kids, but they've seen a big uptick. So pretty much every district in the state is complaining to DESE about the number of students we have to put out of district and the cost of that. So that's where we're looking for help. And it's not only the tuition reimbursement for what it costs to send a student out, but it's the transportation. It could be up to $300 a day to transport a student to and from the school, but it also, this issue with homeless is causing us a big problem too, because it jumped about 600 kids from September to now. 490
to a little over 1,000, I think.
Yes, there's about 650 students who have now gone homeless. That now we have to, not all of them are transported because some of them are still in Brockton, but a lot of them are being transported. And again, costs that we weren't ready for that many more kids to be transported, to and from another town.
It sounds like you're really working at it, trying to straighten it
Yeah.
out. That's all you can do. Thank you.
Any other questions? Mr. Rodriguez?
Can you elaborate more on when you say kids that are severe that we can't handle in district? What is the actual number, and how come the school district hasn't come up with a plan as of yet to try to keep those kids? And what's it take to actually keep those kids?
Jamie, you want to come up and give us a...
Good evening, everyone. So to answer the question, I can get back to you on firm numbers, but there's about 17 to 18 that have been outplaced due to really significant psychiatric challenges. The challenge becomes the provision of sort of where they are in their illness requires a therapeutic milieu in which we can process feelings as they emerge. We can sort of support kids throughout the day. As we work to re-envision our therapeutic day school and change programming there and really sort of try to focus, we're hopeful in the future our in-district programming will begin to sustain and support more students. The issue we're currently having, for example, is we have a student at elementary level, active suicidal ideation. there are no beds. So of the existing placements that we have, they have all been exhausted. So we, not only is the number relative to who's been outplaced, but we also have a fair number of students who were struggling to meet their needs, and the state infrastructure for mental health is broken. So the beds are not there. The wait is currently 6 to 8 months for a private clinician to work with you individually. We're trying to reorganize ourselves differently. As you know, one of the major priorities of the district is the multi-tiered system of support for social and emotional learning, that we're feeling early screening, identification, and support will go a long way. But that's not going to be a solution for tomorrow, right? That's really a longer term plan to build infrastructure. So our focus is on stabilization. So at some point in the spring, we'll be back to talk a little bit about how we're reimagining our pathways and support programs to support the schools needing to stabilize students both therapeutically and behaviorally. We sort of have two competing strands, both within that emotional impairment space that require specific programming. So we're looking to create stabilization centers in district, staffed with the appropriate clinical staff to sort of give kids support in the district without needing to go out, and then that team support the capacity at the schools to then welcome the student back into the school. So we do have plans. We are happy to share them maybe later this spring to sort of give you a sense of the 30,000-foot revisions we will be making to try to build infrastructure. But the major issue is there is a mental health crisis in this country, and we were not prepared. So once we got through COVID, now we're facing the residual leftover trauma and sort of long-held social challenges that were there bubbling, struggling all along, are all really coming to a head. So part of the out-of-district placement costs was necessary to provide students the level of support they need. And what we're seeing is just a really acute level of need that we're unable to meet. And that's not to say we don't have plans in the works, right, to sort of lessen that burden as time goes on, but it really requires us rethinking some programming. So there are plans in the works. I'm happy to come back and share more of that with you. But the reality is there's 16 to 18, and there's at least a dozen or so currently in district that we can't find placements for.
To piggyback off that, no, obviously we're trying to get there. Do you foresee it in the future that we can sustain to have these students stay in district and come up with a therapeutic plan to keep them in the city of Brockton, not outplacing them? Do you see that happening? Can we actually have that infrastructure and have a school model to address those?
I believe we can. Now, I don't want to misspeak to say what we can build in district will meet everybody's needs, because I do believe our responsibility as a school district is to provide a continuum of services. Everything from full inclusion with some support all the way to potential hospitalization placements or residential day schools or residential schools. So for the vast majority of the kids we're having to send out, we do feel like we have plans in place to absorb them and actually bring some students back into next year if we're able to execute our programming the right way. But to be totally just transparent with you, at a 30,000-foot level, whatever we build will never really not be enough for everybody, right? So I do believe the vast majority will be able to sustain and maintain, but there will always be that number who will require just that level of service. No matter what we can do, right, in Brockton, I can do everything but stop short at opening a psychiatric clinic, right? I can't open a psych hospital, right? But I can do everything up to just about there, but there will always be that group of kids who require that level of support and service.
All right, thank you.
And I'll just add, we have sent more kids out because we're in trying times. So when you have students who are showing some of the signs of real serious safety concerns, and as you've seen across, the country with school incidences of violence and things like that. So if we feel a child is really a danger to the environment for themselves or fellow students or staff, we do err on the side of caution and put those students out of district when we have to, because it's you have to take all of that into consideration. It's not easy times, and you always want to make sure you keep schools safe, and unfortunately the struggles that some of these students are having and the severe mental health crisis they're going through, some clearly present a danger. And that's something that when you look at what's going on with school violence and things like that, that, we are erring on the side of caution, which is costing more money, no doubt about it. It's sad. There's no easy way to say it because you pray that no student has to, no child or adult has to go through, but we are seeing children as early as kindergarten showing some real serious signs of mental illness, and it's very, very, very upsetting and sad. It's a really tough time.
Okay, any other questions? All right, so I'm going to move on to just keeping a close eye on the clock. I'm going to move on to other business. For the Finance Subcommittee, does anybody have anything they'd like to bring up and under other business? All right, I think that concludes tonight, so I will entertain a motion to adjourn.
Motion to adjourn.
Can I get a second?
Second.
All right, so thank you, Mr. Sullivan, seconded properly by Mr. Homer. Can I get a roll call? Mrs. Sullivan? Oh, yeah, all in favor? Okay, thank you, everybody.